Good afternoon, Madam President, and thank you. I rise to discuss this bill, but first, before we even can get to that, I just think it's important to talk about the process. That here we are, March 1st, in the middle of a pandemic, and the rush, the emergency bills we're going to deal with aren't dealing with the COVID pandemic. They aren't dealing with health care equity. They aren't dealing with initiatives to help the families where we have a 100% increase in unemployment and families who are struggling to make ends meet. No. We're going to deal with tax credits, pilots for cities without funding, and DSS liens. This session has been littered with examples where the majority has bent over backwards last fall to make sure that every voice in Connecticut had the right to vote. We went so far as to send every house an absentee ballot to make sure that vote was registered. But now, when voices of those who vote show up, that's a different story. Not so sure we want to hear those voices. Whether it was with a virtual legislative session, mindful that 23% of Connecticut has no connectivity to the internet, and that most of those individuals reside in cities, we nonetheless move forward. Move forward and have public hearings that get terminated when there's 1,700 voices waiting to be heard. The people in this city decided on constitutional government. It is our tradition. It is the people's government, not ours. And here, we don't listen to those voices. Once again, I ask, why are we rushing? When the governor said today, one of these bills he's going to augment later because you couldn't get your ducks in a row now. To me, it would be more prudent that we should exercise an abundance of opportunity for people to voice their opinion in this legislative session. And maybe we needed to wait so that we know what's in the bill and what it's fully going to be, instead of moving parts of it now and pass other parts later to catch up with it. We're passing a policy without funding. Wow. So, back to the bill. So yesterday, I had the opportunity to watch some of the early morning Sunday news programs and was watching an ABC News report on a precious story where there was a woman in Pennsylvania, an employee of McDonald's, who was about to turn 100 years old. 100 years old, and she's still working. A lot of it had to do with the fact that she enjoyed it. The customers enjoyed her. As a matter of fact, she has a mailbox outside the store. And the point of it was she continues to work so she can pay her bills. And what really struck me was when she said, when they asked her about the money, she said, "I didn't have a lot, but I always had enough." And that's what I'm hearing in Connecticut, that it's becoming more and more and more difficult for the Ruthie Schusters of the world to have enough to get by. We're We're looking at a bill that's over almost $500 million with no funding mechanism. Wow. What do you say to someone like that that's struggling? They've always had enough, and they may have another tax increase coming down the line. We've heard a lot. I've heard about double taxation, righting wrongs, unfairness. Let me tell you, I think where we have agreement is on the DSS liens. And I thank Senator Moore for bringing this issue forward. It was, as Senator Duff said, wrong and backwards. But many of the policies of the DSS in the state of Connecticut are wrong and backwards, which I have been watching for the last decade. As we have turned, I shouldn't say we, as I've watched the majority, it started with the administration of Governor Malloy, turn the hands of time back. When we had a Republican governor, Jody Rell, we had a full community spouse protected amount. No longer. No, we're going to cut that. We had personal needs allowance, $72 a month. That's all these folks had after expending all their finances. That had to get cut back to $60 to save $1 million, and for the past 11 years, it's never been put back. Meals on Wheels, home care reimbursement. This is the legacy of the last 10 years. You want to talk what's wrong and backwards? That's what's wrong and backwards. This bill I agree with. This part of the bill, I agree with. Because what it does is that it enables an individual who in their time of need reached out to the state and asked for help. They were between a rock and a hard place. They got the assistance, and the state did place a lien. But many times that lien becomes a structural impediment to enabling that family to move out of the neighborhood where they are and to move into better neighborhoods where they might have a more safe community and a better education for their kids, to get up and out of poverty. And the lien becomes the structural impediment because it takes equity out of the home when they try to sell one house and move to another. For that reason, I think this DSS, the release of the DSS lien is appropriate, because it gives people the opportunity that when they were in a tough spot and the state helped out, it's not going to always follow them wherever they go, and they have the opportunity to move forward. But the other two components, when we look at the pilot program, fairness comes to mind. Fairness comes to mind because I reside in a community that has a municipal airport 100% within its geographic boundary. But yet, by law, Connecticut General Statute 12-19A only gives the host community half the pilot and has to share it with someone else. It's even, there's an exemption in this pilot bill to continue that unfairness. And the fact that it's a policy statement and we don't know where the revenue's coming from, it's another one of these promises, broken promises, I might add, that this is what Connecticut, this is what happens with this majority. You have affordable health care 8 years ago. Promise made, promise broken. The MRSA promise, made, broken. ECS, we redid that formula to base it on fairness and need. That was part of the bipartisan budget. But this budget, no. This governor's budget, turn the hands of time back, go back to when educational funding is based on political whim, which resulted in one of the largest achievement gaps in the country. That's a promise made, but we're going to leave kids behind. And how about that property tax credit? Where's that? It's not here. This pilot issue, as Senator Minor said, there's a budget hole. We don't have a balanced budget. We're taking money either out of the rainy day fund or hoping that Washington can bail us out. But the fact of the matter is, when you make these promises without putting a dollar amount in the budget, you're looking at a tax increase. And that tax increase is going to fall upon Connecticut's middle class. And I'm here to say what the middle class believes in this. Just looking at the pilot, if we were to take this pilot, and every time I've heard about this revision to the pilot program, it's always been coupled with the mansion tax. And the mansion tax is defined as homes of $400,000 and more. So I crunch a little numbers. I looked at the runs that were provided. Town of Stratford, my hometown. We would get at $100 million an extra $126,000, $127,000. That's what we would get under this new pilot. But if the majority adopts the property tax, the statewide property tax, the mansion tax, as they define it, at $400,000, the effect in my town would be that the town of Stratford residents, the taxpayers in our town, would send $1.34 million to Hartford for the $126,000 in return. That middle-class town loses $1 million because the state levies a tax to take out of our community to send it somewhere else. Once again, keep in mind the comment. I didn't have a lot of money, but I always had enough. That's like the middle-class mantra. But in Connecticut, enough isn't making it anymore. It's getting more and more difficult, and bills like this contribute to it. Last is the DRS. I hear double taxation. I hear that New York is a bully. Here's the fact. Under current law, Connecticut's entitled to the $300 million. But by extending this credit, we're giving up that revenue. Just think what that revenue can do. First, could do away with the mansion tax I just talked about, and you could fully fund your pilot. Two, we could not put a $75 million tax like the governor proposed in his budget on health care premiums, and instead give premium relief. And if we extrapolate that out, $300 million could give somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 80% reduction in health care premiums for middle-class families. That's like taking a mortgage payment of $2,000 and reducing it to $400. Talk about relief. There you have it. And I constantly get asked when I'm pushing on the reinsurance, oh, where's the funding mechanism? How are you going to afford this? Right here. Here's a place you can do that. But we're going to pass up on that opportunity to provide it to individuals who, based on 2013, 2014 statistics, people working, living in Connecticut, working in New York, the median income was $433,000. I come from a town where the median income is $38,000. And yet the budget that we see that's proposed, because there's not enough funding, has a mileage tax, a gas tax, a $75 million tax on health care premiums, and asking those families from Stratford to pony up the extra cash. If we don't provide or extend this tax credit, all these things, the health care, the mileage tax, the gas tax, don't need to be imposed on Connecticut's middle class. Once again, I'm just guided by Ruthie Schuster, who always didn't have enough, didn't have a lot, but she always had enough. This bill makes it more difficult for middle-class families to have just enough to get by. We need to be more mindful of the middle class. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Kelly, will you remark further?